in Franchiseville are happy as can be. They all own their own businesses, they live the American dream. Mr. Softy, Mr. Reader, Mrs. Fields, and Dairy Queen. Every franchisee is happy and free, and they can't be fired, and they all retire with the life they always dreamed. When you go to Franchiseville, as you will undoubtedly notice, everybody seems happy and nobody ever seems to have a complaint. And even when government agencies ask if anything is wrong, everything needs to be adjusted in Franchiseville in regards to franchise regulations and enforcement of those regulations, despite all the problems and the complaints that show up on my website, unhappyfranchisee.com. Franchisees never show up and never complain. So Jim Lager is a franchisee, 40-year franchisee, and he had already been with two other national chains, and he was recruited by a chain called PIRTEK USA. They weren't really very well known. And Lager came in and hit it out of the park, developed the Dallas-Fort Worth area for them, did $1 million in sales the first year, $2 million in sales the next year, and did well with PIRTEK, and PIRTEK did well with Jim Lager, in that Lager also served as a mentor to a lot of other franchisees. He did seminars, went around and helped people on his own dime, and he also became the poster boy for their franchise sales efforts. And they put him on the website, and they put them on in their ads, national ads, and they wrote up these press release type articles about him and his military service, and they posted them all over the internet, including a lot of third-party websites that kind of made it look like they were third-party articles, but they really were PIRTEK's propaganda. And all was fine. Everything worked the way it was supposed to until the franchisor in the USA was sold back to the people who founded it in Australia, and a new franchisor came in, and for reasons that are discussed elsewhere, they didn't really like Jim Lager, and they wanted him out of the system. And so they had a fiery confrontation, but they finally settled it, and their mediator was David Kaufmann, who I will lovingly refer to as King David. They came up with a settlement agreement in September, I believe it was, 2020. So Jim Lager was required to take down his complaints and his accounts of the problems he had with PIRTEK, and including from some third-party websites. And PIRTEK was required to take down references to Jim Lager as their franchisee, including these success stories. Jim Lager complied with, however, PIRTEK didn't comply, in my understanding, and they left these articles up there that sort of froze his story in time, when he was happy and when he was successful with the previous owners. Jim Lager's attorney filed a complaint. David Kaufmann, who is prominent as a franchisor attorney, who's supposed to be an unbiased arbiter in this case, and says, no, I'm not going to make him take it down. And he said, well, they're on third-party websites, so that's not part of the agreement. They don't have any control over these stories. The franchisees' attorneys go back and they found a couple of former PIRTEK employees who worked in the IT department and would know such things, and they came up with two affidavits that said, no, in fact, PIRTEK does have control over these. Some of these, they've got the sign-on to these accounts. They were like, press release accounts. Franchisee attorneys put in another complaint to David Kaufmann, and he denied it again. So last night I decided, let's get to the bottom of this, do our own research, went on to Google, went on to Bing, and found out a couple of things. One is that the Jim Lager story is all over the internet, and that PIRTEK has not made much of an effort to take anything down. And then there's this one, a big full-page photo of Jim Lager promoting the franchise, and this one isn't even on third party. This is actually on PIRTEK's own server. The URL is private.pirtekusa.com images, but it also says not secure, so obviously it's not private. And now the third thing that I find really significant or striking is the content itself. Read this. Veterans in Franchising cover story. One of the marks of a good leader is that he's not only good at what he does, but makes others around him do better at what they do. This type of leadership earned Jim Lager, owner of multiple PIRTEK locations in Dallas, the multi-unit franchisee magazine for 2014 Most Valuable Performer for a Veteran. After buying his first PIRTEK and franchise in 2010, Lager turned some heads by having the highest first and second year sales of any United States PIRTEK franchise in its history, a record that I believe still stands. Lager then found himself giving motivational speeches at the owners' conference to tell them how he was doing so well. And it goes on to talk about how Gwen O'Kane asked him if he would travel around and visit some struggling locations. Some of those stores, like the PIRTEK in Kent, Washington, went from being in the bottom 10% to being in the top 30% in the country under Lager's tutelage. This is the bad guy that they want to kick out. Guy who just a couple of years earlier is plastered all over the internet about as the most successful, highest performing franchisee in the history of the chain. Wow, all of a sudden, Kim Gubera and Michael Joblove are maintaining that he's a complete scumbag. This is character assassination from one of the confidential documents which was submitted by Joblove to David Kaufmann in order to try and get them to be awarded between $700,000 and $1 million, basically put Lager out of business. And here's why Gubera believes this is so critical to make sure that nobody thinks that Lager is associated with PIRTEK. Mrs. Gubera further explained that given Lager's character, including his growing and use of marijuana and his arrest for domestic abuse or battery, we're not sure which, PIRTEK did not want there to be any association between PIRTEK and the respondents. So first of all, she was so worried about not having any association between Lager and PIRTEK that she left all this information up, including on PIRTEK servers. Have to point out here that there's no evidence of a trial or a conviction for abuse or battery from Jim Lager or battery. No evidence that Jim Lager ever grew or used marijuana, or in other parts of this this private arbitration, the accusation was made that Lager used cocaine and traveled with prostitutes. And there's no evidence of any of that whatsoever, just character assassination. Now, to be fair, the accusation about consorting with prostitutes may have been a big misunderstanding, in that maybe they were referring to Glenn Duncan, who in the Australian financial press did compare himself to Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. The net effect of this is that the internet was purged of the negative side of Lager's experience and the dispute and his frustration, and the positive side, where he was a success story up to that point with the previous franchisor, is preserved. And that seems to indicate one of the ways that the internet has become a repository of positive stories, scrubbed of the negative stories. Attorneys issue invitations to the Isle of Arbitration. When a franchisee gets frisky or loses motivation, he can rant and vent, no embarrassment where no one hears him scream. He'll return refreshed, attitude reset to resume the American dream.